Well, special welcome today to our new series titled The Life and Teachings of Jesus. And today, the first in this series, I've titled The Essence of Discipleship. The Essence of Discipleship. And you heard from the Bible reading, we're going to be focusing on Jesus' great analogy of the vine. But there's a lot of great Christian leaders who typify the essence of discipleship, living that out. Let me tell you the story of one of these. His name is Zachariah Botros. He's a Coptic priest. Let's have a look at him. He's coming. Promise. You'll see him soon. Oh, perhaps not. No? Ah, there he is. Now, doesn't he look like a godly man? Zachariah received a phone call a few years ago. He was residing in America at this time, and it was from the FBI. And they were alerting him to the latest threats. Various Muslim factions had upped the price on his head. The bounty had increased. It was now at $60 million US. In other words, if someone takes him out, that is the reward. They also informed him that he had another new price that had been released, and this was just for his address. If someone could give his accurate address, they would receive $1 million US. Now, why are the Muslims so concerned and even fearful of this man? Well, it's because they estimate that he has led some 6 million Muslims to a dynamic and lively faith in Jesus Christ. Let me tell you a little bit about his history. He grew up in Egypt, and he was always a morally upright young lad, and felt that it would be a good profession to go into the church. And so he decided he would study to become a Coptic priest. In the mid-60s, as a young priest, he had a radical encounter with Jesus Christ. A little bit like the moment where Jesus talks with Nicodemus in John chapter 3, where he says to Nicodemus, you know, you're Israel's teacher, but you need to be born again. No one enters the kingdom of God unless they are born again by God's Spirit. Well, that transforming work of God's Spirit happened in the mid-60s for this Coptic priest. His ministries exploded. The bishops at times thought he was a bit radical. Well, let me pick up on one of the great church stories of his life. Two tremendous churches he pastored. I'll pick on the second of those. He was posted to a church in Cairo. Beautiful building, gorgeous place, but unfortunately down to only 15 members. He took it on. Became the priest of that church, and as he started to minister, as he started to pray, as he sought the Lord's will for that church, it started to grow. But more than that, God's Spirit started to sweep through that place in phenomenal power. Amazing things were happening, like we read in the book of Acts. People were coming in with needs of healing, needs of emotional depression, others claiming that there was demonic influence in their life, evil spirits, all sorts of needs, and they would come and be prayed for at the church. And so many of them, I am talking in the hundreds, experienced the miraculous power that can only come by God's Spirit. Sick people were instantaneously healed. Those who believed that they were suffering from demonic influence, evil spirits, were prayed for and they were set free. Their life changed as a result of it. Those who had emotional conditions, again, they were prayed for. The conditions changed. Well, this was not just attracting people from a Coptic church heritage, it was attracting Muslims. And not just in their dozens, not just in their hundreds, but in their thousands. And they came. And many of them came searching, not only with needs for healing or deliverance, but they came searching. I've prayed for Allah for years, but he never listens. I want to know God. Could Jesus help me. I know he's a prophet, but is he, like you Christians claim, truly the Son of God, the gateway to knowing God? And in their thousands, they discovered that. Well, his church grew from that 15 in just a few years to be 5,000 strong. And in the journey of all of this, obviously that's a big church. You need a good staff to make a church like that functional. But instead of recruiting people from the normal Coptic system, he felt that the priests were not adequately trained. It's a very academic training. He wanted them to be more hands-on. He looked at how Jesus made disciples, and his disciples were trained on the job. They would watch Jesus do ministry. They would talk about it. He would send them out to do the same, and they would come back and talk about it. It was an apprenticeship. He started to train 20 pastors like that. And this church continued to grow. Another thing that they brought into the ministries of the church, they developed a closed satellite television broadcast, which started to reach millions of people around the world. Well, there was a change in the Egyptian government. Muslims set upon the church in persecution. Many priests were imprisoned, including Zachariah Botros. And as he was dumped in a prison cell, the conditions are nothing like our Aussie, you might say, first-class prison cells. No, this was awful. He's in a prison cell that's not much larger than your dining room table as far as width of floor. It's concrete, and he has to share it with three other, there was a total of 3 people in there. 3 guys, 3 priests. The conditions were just awful. There's no air conditioning. I mean, in the Egyptian summers, it's 40 plus all the time. Little bit of air coming under the door. An open, well, it's a toilet, but really it was more like an open sewer. It stunk. The food that they were fed, well, they'd bring in some slops. Well, actually, they'd sit them outside the door for 2 hours until the cockroaches crawled into the food, and then they would slide them under the door on plastic plates. They said mostly they just tipped the food straight down the toilet. The bread was about all they could eat from it. It was infested with mosquitoes. And so the walls changed colour. As they're squashing the mosquitoes on the walls turn red with their own blood. Now, that's not the only suffering that Zachariah Botros is experiencing. He has no word of his family. He has a wife and children. He doesn't know if they've been imprisoned or even killed. There's no word, no communication whatsoever. And at night, wrestling with those painful thoughts of what's happened to my family. If he wanted to roll over, he had to tap the other guys on the shoulder, because they couldn't roll over unless they all stood up and reshuffled. That's how much room they had. Well, there was a further change in the Egyptian government, and they became more lenient. And the priests were let out, and Christian leaders let out of those sort of conditions into a more reasonable prison, and they were allowed in time to visit their families. Eventually, Zachariah Botros was released. Ultimately, he moved to the west, but he continued his closed satellite television broadcast. Currently resides in America, and because of the great fruitfulness of his ministries, the Muslims want to take him down. But you know his response to the FBI, how I started the story? He said, I'm not concerned. The Lord has looked after me so far. He will continue to look after me. I'll do what you say. I'll put up some more security cameras, some more efficient locks around the place, but the Lord will protect me. He's an elderly man today, but still continuing his ministry. You want to read about his biography? Dr. Stuart Robinson from Crossway writes his biography. Tremendous story. But you know, when I tell some of these stories up here, I realise that sometimes you might think, well, how do you know that's all accurate? Well, I know his son, personally. Served with him, prayed with him many times. This is real stuff, friends. Well, to me, Zachariah Botros is someone who typifies what I'm talking about today. He has understood and embraced the essence of discipleship. Let me explain what that's all about. We're going to look at John 15, the first verse. Jesus starts like this, and he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He's creating an illustration here. I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. Now why he said I'm the true vine, you may remember passages in Isaiah, for instance, Isaiah 5 and the first 7 verses, talks about Israel being the Lord's vine or vineyard, but it was a disappointment. It didn't bear the fruit the Lord was looking for. The people of Israel kept turning away from the Lord. Well, Jesus is saying, I'm the true vine. I'm the true vine. My Father is the gardener. Now here we see an illustration of this vine. These stems are real grapevines from my backyard, actually. Here we see the main vine, which represents Jesus Christ in his analogy. We see the branches, various branches coming off, and of course they must be connected to the main vine. Now it says God the Father is the gardener or the wine dresser. It goes on to say in 15:2 that he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Do we see any fruitless branches here? I wonder. This one looks pretty healthy. See what the fruit's like. Yes, that's quite nice. Yep. Very nice. Recommend it. Would you guys like some? Okay. Let's have some volunteers. Let's share around some grapes. One more volunteer. Oh, here we go. Lovely. Thank you. Just take one and pass them. Take a few and pass them around. Well, the passage here, he says, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. There's plenty of fruit on that one. I even tasted some. Some fruit here on this one, definitely. Fruit on this one. What's this here? Looks healthy, leafy and green, but no fruit. Well, in his analogy, what did he say? He cuts off the branches that have no fruit. So it means he must be going to do something like this. The branches that have no fruit are removed. The great commentator William Barclay, the late Scottish Bible scholar, he explains from this passage saying that the vines that the Israelites were using at the time, they tended to have two types of branches. Some branches produced fruit, some didn't, and never would. Now, to get a better yield, the Israelites cut off the branches that didn't bear fruit. 15:6 says this, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. So Jesus is saying, unless you remain in real relationship with me, you'll never produce fruit. Let me read 15:2 again for a moment. 15:2 here. It says, the second part of the verse, while every branch in me that does bear fruit, he prunes to make it even more fruitful. So the ones that are bearing fruit, he still prunes. Bit of dead wood here, snip a bit of that off. Also a bit of fungus there, got to get rid of that. Okay, snip a bit of that off there. Goodness, that looks very unusual. Oh, look at that, that doesn't look too healthy, does it? Very strange. Well, the Father says, the Father in heaven is saying here through Jesus Christ's analogy that he prunes the healthy branches. Now, I'll tell you what, pruning doesn't sound too comfortable. Anyone care for a bit of pruning? I remember sharing something similar one other occasion, and a chap put up his hands, and I walked down and said, hold out your fingers, sir. Everyone else thought it was funny. I'm not sure that he did. What could pruning mean for you and I as disciples of Jesus? Well, it could be painful circumstances, poor health, lost dreams, difficult relationships. You mean it. You name it. Those seasons in life where we're going through things that are challenging. But in the experience of that, I'm not saying all of those experiences are ordained by God, but I'm saying some of them might be. And in the journey of those experiences, God is actually wanting to prune us, clean us up, make us healthier, make us stronger. 15:3 says this, "You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you," he says to his disciples. "Remain in me, and I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me." And that's the strong analogy here. If these branches are not connected to the main stem that is planted in the ground and drawing the nutrients from the ground, these branches will die, let alone not be fruit-bearing. Jesus is saying to his disciples, you must remain deeply connected with me. It's about a relationship with God, one where you're a person of prayer. You love to meet with God, alone with God, to try and sense what he is saying to you, to pray to him, to worship him, to sing songs that we've been doing today, songs of worship, to open his word, the scriptures, and see what he would say to you through them, to meditate on the life of Jesus Christ, be inspired by that. He wants us to develop that intimacy with him. 15:5 says this, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." He's not just saying that the disciple of Jesus will bear some fruit, a little fruit. But he's actually saying they're going to bear much fruit. There's going to be plenty of fruit in the genuine disciple. Remain in me, the time will come. You will bear much fruit. So let me further illustrate this with a short passage from Matthew 11:28. Jesus' words, he says this, "Come to me." Beautiful start. He's calling people to him. He says to the crowds, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Now what's he mean by this when he says, "Come to me"? Well, he's calling people. Have you ever felt weary and burdened? Do you ever felt a bit stressed and tired? Sure, most of us do at times. Tell you what, Kat was looking pretty tired over at our place. She's got a flu virus and she's all that jet lag she's carrying. You ever feel weary and tired? Ever feel stressed and overburdened? Well, Jesus is calling you to come to him and you'll find rest. How do we find that rest? Well, he says, "Take my yoke upon you." Now, I wonder what on earth that means. Take my yoke upon you. Let's have a look. See, there's some bulls here and see a yoke. There's a yoke similar to the ones of Jesus' day, a wooden device fitted over the back of two bulls. And the idea is you attach some ploughing equipment behind it, the bulls would pull that and you plough up fields. A couple of handsome looking critters there, aren't they? Mind you, I'd still be happy to barbecue them. No. Take my yoke upon you, Jesus is saying. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, first of all, he said my yoke. Not your yoke, not someone else's yoke, not society's yoke, my yoke. And I wonder how many burdens we place upon ourselves that Jesus never wanted to place there. Something from your past, a burden you're carrying, some yoke you've allowed to be placed upon you. Something you've placed upon yourself, perhaps. Well, he's saying you've got to get rid of that. Because to put a yoke on, if you can't have one on there already, you've got to get rid of whatever was already there. He's saying, put my yoke upon you. And then he goes on to say this. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Learn from me. Now, this is an interesting point. It's quite possible here that Jesus is saying something that again relates to this farming analogy. Apparently, you pop a couple of bulls together and expect them to pull some strong weight behind them, and they've never worked together before, you don't get much work out of them. They just fight. They need a bit of training. And one of the things that's very important that happens is that the stronger bull ends up becoming the leader. The weaker bull learns to submit. And only then can the farmer get some good work out of them. Now, I think when Jesus says, learn from me, I wonder if he's saying, I'm going to get right alongside you under the other side of the yoke. And I'm going to help you pull those burdens, but you have to learn from me. You have to allow me to be the lead bull. He'll bear your burdens with you. It doesn't mean you don't carry them to an extent as well. But he wants to come alongside, he wants to bear them with you. And an interesting thing from the farming analogy is the lead bull, the stronger bull, always pulls the greater load. Jesus wants to come alongside. He wants you to learn from him. He wants to carry the greater load. But you need to be willing to let him place his yoke upon you and come alongside you and be that leader in your life. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Why is his yoke easy? Well, it becomes a lot easier if he's helping you carry the load. And you're carrying something that was designed for you. This is an interesting story. It's not in the Bible, but in church tradition, according to William Barclay, it's written that Jesus, as you know, was a carpenter for many years. There is a history, a tradition that Jesus made the best yokes around. They fitted the cows, the bulls so well. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? He wants to place a yoke upon you that is well fitted, something that was designed for you. And that's what makes the burden easier. Let's go back to the main passage, 15:7 and 8. It says this, if you remain in me, my words remain in you. Ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. Oh, I'll tell you, that's a positive verse. You ever memorize that for a verse of prayer? 15:7, John. Ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. Great memory verse. I like that one. Ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. What do we need to do, though, to see that happen? He says, you must remain in me and my words remain in you. In other words, you become so connected to Jesus, just as these branches are so connected with this vine, the main vine coming up here. We need to be so connected with Jesus, so close to Jesus, that our words start to become his words. That our thoughts are so influenced by him. That the things that God is concerned about, we become concerned about. The things that anger God, we anger us. Injustice in the world and so on. That the things that cause us to feel depth of love for wonderful, good things that are happening, righteous acts, kind acts in this world, that we feel a sense of wanting to bless and encourage people who are doing that. That we start to feel the very things that God is feeling. That our prayers are so influenced by our relationship with God, they're one with his hopes, his desires, his purposes. And finally, verse 8 says, this is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Well, in that final verse there, it's saying that a disciple is someone who will bear fruit, and lots of it. Now that's a challenge. That is a challenge. What is fruit bearing? What does that look like? Well, let me give you the most natural application, the thing that Jesus was surely referring to. A grapevine produces grapes. A disciple of Jesus would produce more disciples of Jesus. That is the most logical application. What's he saying? Well, fruitfulness, a grapevine is fruitful, it produces lots of grapes. A disciple of Jesus is fruitful, they produce more disciples. Obviously, Zechariah Botros has produced quite a harvest. Now, that's a challenge to you and I, because if this is so central to Jesus' teaching, it means you and I have got to get better at helping people into a relationship with Jesus and then discipling them, helping them grow. Now, I know that there are further applications, but to be honest, they're secondary. We could say fruitfulness is perhaps the fruit of the Spirit. Character. I think it can be stretched to that application. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, humility, and self-control. 9 aspects to the fruit of the Spirit. Absolutely. It can mean character. It can mean things like a ministry that is thriving and God is doing wonderful things. That's fruitfulness. But to be honest, the foundational application is a disciple produces more disciples. We need to let the weight of that truth rest upon us, because I believe God is wanting to freshen up that call throughout his churches all over the world. But I'm not saying it's not a challenge. Let me finish with this illustration. A friend of mine at Bible college went into the mission field, and his calling, he felt, was to reach the Karen people. They're in a few different countries spread around. He was going to Vietnam in the jungles to help reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's wonderful what's happening amongst the Karen people around the world. They're opening up to Christ in a beautiful way. And when I was at my latest Baptist denominational meeting, 2 new Karen churches were introduced, and they're already 300 or 400 strong, both in Melbourne. A wonderful work of God amongst the Karen people. Well, Leo felt a calling to reach them many years ago when they were not so open. And, God was doing a good work, but it was tough. And the lifestyle was so different for him. He's living in a jungle. It's hot, it's humid, and he came from New Zealand. So there was a lot of adjustment had to go on. And he likes his food, Leo, and I tell you what, they're pretty poor people. And they felt, though, as a guest, if Lee was visiting a family, they wanted to offer him meat, but there's very little meat around. And so they'd give him bush rat. And Leo said to us one time when he was giving a Misho's report, he was used to come to our church and report. Actually, my music director used to affectionately know him as the Rat Boy. And because of this story, he said, it sounds a bit exotic saying Vietnamese bush rat, but no, it's like you went into your shed, shot an Australian rat and cooked it up and ate it. It was not appetising at all, but he didn't want to offend them. He would eat the bush rat. He said, I'd rather they'd just given me the rice, but... Anyway, he'd been working hard and he needed a furlough. And so he was having a break and he'd gone to quite a nice beachy area and he's having some time out and he'd gone off for a swim. He's quite a well-built guy, but as he swam out, he got himself in a bit of trouble. He got caught in a rip. And he could feel himself getting swept further and further out, and he just wasn't able to get out of it. And so he started to signal. It was a patrolled beach, so he started to signal. He's flapping his arms around out in the ocean, trying to get the lifeguards' notice, because he's up there in a tall stand, he's got his binoculars. And sure enough, the guy spots him, and he signals back. He comes and gives a big wave back. And Leo has a sigh of relief. A few minutes go by. He's still sitting up there. And he's thinking, oh my goodness, does this guy not see me? And he more frantically waves in the water, makes sure he needs to know I'm in trouble. And anyway, guy just waves back again. Big wave back. And I'll tell you what, Leo's, he's really weak. He's starting to go under. He's swallowing water, and he said, I was having my past was flashing before my eyes, and I've heard about that. That means you're going to die. And he said, I wouldn't have minded so much if I was reaching the Karen people and under persecution, I died for Jesus. But, I'm just having a swim. And then he said, all of a sudden, he felt this hand on his shoulder. That was a lifeguard. Attached to a rope, and he brought Leo back to shore. And Leo's laying on the beach. He's coughing and spluttering, and eventually he gets these words out. What were you doing, man? I signalled you ages ago, and you took forever to get here. I could have drowned. And the lifeguard says to him, well, I was a younger man, and as soon as someone looked in trouble, I'd swim out to try and help them. And I got all sorts of reactions. Hey, what you doing here, man? I'm not drowning, I'm all right. Other times, when I could see the person was seriously in trouble, I'd go out and I'd try and bring them back in, but because their strength wasn't spent, it was so difficult getting them back to shore. They're flapping around everywhere, and so now I always wait. I'm not too sure if Leo liked the answer. But he said, it wasn't too long after that, God took that experience and spoke to him. And he felt the Lord say to him, Leo, if you want to be really fruitful in your ministry reaching the Karen people, your strength has to be spent. Not your strength, my strength. Not your strength, my strength. Let my strength flow through your life. Remember the Apostle Paul when he wrote these words? 2 Corinthians 12:10, for when I am weak, then I am most strong. The essence of discipleship, friends, is getting to that place where we're drawing from Jesus' strength. Because of the sustenance he provides, because of the intimacy with him, we're doing it with his provision, rather than in our own strength or partially in our own strength. And that's such an important journey for us all. Now, I wonder this morning, are there some people here and you're feeling there are burdens in your life? And you're perhaps thinking, my intimacy with the Lord is not where I want it to be. I'm wanting those burdens to be lifted. I'm wanting Jesus to come alongside. I'm wanting to learn the essence of discipleship and draw from the sustenance of the true vine, Jesus. I wonder if that's you here today, as we stand together and as the worship team returns. I wonder if there's some people here today, and let's be upstanding. We're going to sing some more worship to the Lord. I wonder today, is there some people and you're thinking, hey Lee, well, I could do with some prayer for this, because I want to be released to be the disciple that Jesus wants me to be. I wonder. Can I pray for you? Father, I want to pray for our gathered congregation today. Lord, speak to each of us. This is perhaps one of the deepest truths anywhere in Scripture. It's a principle that if we get this right, everything else flows out of it. Help us to be a people, to understand what it is, to be truly connected to the true vine, Jesus, allowing your sustenance to flow through us and allow that fruit in our life to come alive. And as we read in the passage, for the glory of God the Father. Friends, if you're here today and you're thinking, actually, I could do with some prayer for that reality to be released in my life, I'm going to come down the front right now. Come forward. We'd really like to pray for you. Let's be everything that Jesus has called us to be. It's going to be right down here. Come forward right now.